Hello, everyone, and welcome to Political Frenemies, the podcast where a Liberal Democrat and a Conservative debate the week's politics, but still remain friends at the end. How's about that? I'm Mathew Hulbert. I'm a Liberal Democrat activist and a former Lib Dem councillor as well. And the other guy there, if you're watching, and if you're listening, the other guy who'll be speaking momentarily is Chris Newton, Dr. Chris Newton, an academic and a former Tory policy defence advisor when they were last in opposition. Chris, how are you?
Yeah, hello, Matthew. I'm good. It's always good to have these chats every week. Just another sort of busy week. And there's been a busy week in politics, despite the fact that it's supposed to be recess. Well, it is parliamentary recess, but there's been a lot of political activity going on, and we'll get into that during the course of the programme. But I do think that we need to start this episode just to talk about what happened at the start of the week and the extremely tragic scenes that we saw in Liverpool at the start of the week.
Absolutely, Chris, and just shocking events that it's really difficult to kind of get your head around. I saw some of the videos that were going around social media, and you couldn't quite believe your eyes, could you? I mean, just appalling. And yeah, we obviously felt it was important before reflecting on the week's politics to just say that, you know, we're obviously very sorry that occurred, and that our hearts go out to those who were affected. It's amazing, Chris, that people weren't more seriously hurt, if I can put it like that. I mean, thank goodness that they weren't.
I should say for context, for if you're not watching from the UK, an incident happened where an SUV ploughed into a crowd of football supporters. This was Liverpool football supporters, and there was a big procession. They were celebrating winning the Premier League, which is the top football league here. And yeah, absolutely, shocking scenes. And given that there's legal proceedings now, we're not going to comment any further on what happened and the events that led up to what happened. We will let legal proceedings take their course. But I would also like to offer my sympathies to all of those who were affected too.
Absolutely. And I was also going to say, Chris, that I don't know if you think this as well, that these Fridays are suddenly rolling by really quickly, aren't they? It feels to me like we've no longer recorded one podcast, then it's time to record the next one. So I don't know if it's something about reaching middle age, Chris, but weeks seem to fly by.
Yeah, just time seems to go, more quickly the older you get. It's very strange, but yeah, the weeks just go, and yeah, it's hard to keep up sometimes, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And can we just say to folks as well, and no doubt I'll repeat this at the end, that, we're really appreciative of those of you that tune in, whether watching us on YouTube, and also don't forget you can catch us on your smart TVs via the YouTube app, or whether you listen via one of the several podcast platforms that we're on. We are building our audience. It's sometimes a bit of a slow process, but our audience is building, and we know that some of you are very, very loyal to us, and we really appreciate that, don't we, Chris?
Yeah, and thanks for listening. Thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for supporting us. It is a long sort of process building our audience, but please spread the word if you like what we're doing. Please sort of spread the word. Tell your friends, tell your family, and hopefully we'll be able to reach more people.
Absolutely. So, Chris, are you ready for us to get into it?
Yeah. Let's go.
So, Chris, we're going to start this week, and this is quite telling in of itself. This is a first for us, not with the government, but with the party that, I mean, much to my chagrin, I have to say, is really making the political weather at the moment, and that is, of course, Reform UK. So let's start with their week. As you say, it has been parliamentary recess, and we didn't necessarily expect a lot of news, a lot of politics to be happening this week, but it's really been as busy as any other week, and perhaps more so in some cases. So obviously, Chris, we saw this platform speech from Farage, and then he took questions afterwards from journalists, and it was interesting that he had people up on the platform with him, some of the new elected Reform mayors, some of the new elected Reform council leaders. They obviously really are trying to get over, Chris, that they are now very much a serious party. I mean, I still think there are issues surrounding that, which we can get into, but clearly they want to be taken seriously.
That's right. And this week, it's interesting that Farage, although we were criticising him last week for not being in Parliament, especially during a crucial week, he's clearly calculated, and he did the same over Christmas, that that's the recess weeks and the weeks where Parliament is off is a good week, was a good opportunity for campaigning. So he clearly took the week previously off in order to campaign this week and to get his message across, not in Parliament, but to the general public directly. And he also announced policies. And again, one criticism that he's often faced is that he doesn't have policies, he hasn't got a program for government. Well, I think you can say now that he's got a suite of policies, and he's building up his policy program very quickly. So he announced policies on child support, child benefit, removing the two child benefit cap relating to universal credit. He announced marriage tax breaks, and we can get into that as well. He also made announcements on Bitcoin and on banking, and making banking illegal as well. And he also reiterated what seems to be his flagship policy, which is lifting the threshold for the basic income tax rate to 20,000. So there's a lot of policies there, but the child benefit policy is an interesting one, because it's not a policy that you would expect from someone from the right of the political spectrum. It is effectively expanding welfare, and so Farage is clearly trying to outflank Labour on the left. Do you think this is clever politics on the part of Farage, and will it work? Will it work in terms of building support among red wall voters?
I think it's really interesting positioning from Nigel Farage's party, and I think I said on the podcast last week that, a bit like Donald Trump, Nigel Farage doesn't necessarily always say what you'd expect him to say, and he is iconoclastic in that way. He'll say what he thinks, and I mean, no doubt there's quite a lot of preparation that goes on behind the scenes before he says these things, but I think it is interesting political positioning. I mean, we've mentioned on this podcast before that, and I personally would only kind of agree with half of this, but I think it's where a lot of the British electorate are. I don't know about a majority, but a sizable proportion, that they are economically left and socially, culturally right, and I think that's where Reform are trying to position themselves. And the only party that has really done that before, and they're that small as to be almost not worth talking about, but I am going to, because they were perhaps the original party to position themselves like this, and that's what I call the barely continuing SDP, which, despite the fact that they were recently beaten yet again in the recent parliamentary by-election by the so-called monster raving mad loony party. I'm amazed that the SDP hasn't just decided to put the final nail in their coffin, so to speak, and disband, but they haven't. They carry on. But they were the first to kind of have this economically left, culturally right political position, which now Reform are taking on. And I do think
I think it's fair to say that Boris was trying to do that as well. At least initially, he was, until COVID happened, and then he just talked about climate change all the time. So this kind of thing was, I think, attempted pretty recently by the Tories as well.
Yeah, and Boris obviously talked about investing in the north and all of that. I'm not sure it ever quite happened. But yeah, I mean, I think it is an interesting political position, and I do think it is where a lot of the electorate are. I mean, I obviously wish that the electorate were both kind of socially liberal and economically left as well, and some are, but many aren't. Now, so that's the political positioning, Chris. Now we talk about the actual realpolitik of the situation, which is how on earth is Nigel Farage going to pay for all of this? And, he said at the meeting, oh, you can't trust any party's figures. Well, I'm not sure that'll, that kind of got him through that press conference, but actually, he is going to face continued questioning on this, and they do need to sort out their numbers if they're going to put this proposition to the electorate moving forward, and especially heading towards the next general election. So, I mean, I think that, and we talked about this before, Chris. Reform are still going from being really rather an amateur operation. They are still endeavouring to become more professional and to be seen as more professional. And I think a big part of that, from their perspective, is that they've got to start being serious about their numbers. And you can't just say, oh, well, all the parties are the same. No, tell us properly how you're going to fund these hugely expensive things that you're saying you're going to do. And it's really interesting, Chris, to see the right-wing media, some right-wing media, criticising Reform now, and Farage saying that, oh, these are just becoming that. This is now a party that is to the left of Labour. This is on economics, and just as they'd say the Labour's numbers can't be trusted, they've now, to be consistent, they've got to say the same about Reform. So, I mean, as someone on the right of politics, Chris, I mean, does it make you feel uneasy that Reform are trying to place themselves economically to the left of Labour, or do you think that it's smart?
Yeah, hopefully you can still see me. So I went off for a bit there, but I mean, I agree with you in terms of the politics, and Farage has clearly sort of realised that this is where the majority of, or at least the centre of politics is, and he's trying to cultivate policy programs around that. Although it's interesting, there are some parts of his policy program, as I've said, that is centre left, but then in terms of the tax cuts, it's very much centre right as well. So we'll have to see. He's developing an interesting mix of policy there. He does risk with the child benefit policy, does risk drawing criticism from Conservatives. Because although his argument for this policy for removing the cap is actually a Conservative argument, and I would recognise it's a Conservative argument. His argument is that family is important. It's the most sort of stable family sort of form in society. Is beneficial that society that we support families and so forth. And he's very much drawing upon people like Orban and the online right talk a lot about families as well. So it's interesting. It is a Conservative argument, but the fiscal Conservative in me would not necessarily support it, because I don't think in the end it's again, it adds to the cost, and we're trying to bring spending under control. I think there are issues there with regards to also where does the line cross, in where does the line position itself in terms of the state supporting childcare and personal responsibility, and does this policy not reward work, and does it not encourage work, and so forth, and how much to what extent is it fair on the people who are struggling, but also you need to be fair on other taxpayers as well. So there are discussions there, and online there's been some interesting arguments between certain key people in reform, let's say, about this. But there is a danger, and you talk about the professionalization of the party. They are still sort of coming out with policies and not really sort of thinking about kind of the correlation between savings and how it's going to be paid for. Although I did find his answers at the press conference. He went on a long list of potential cuts, which are more substantial than any politician that I've seen. I've seen when they've asked that question. He was talking about net zero. He was talking about EDI. He was talking about.
But Chris, isn't it just? And obviously, this is a line that I think the Lib Dems use first, and that Labour took on from us, which is that this is Trussonomics on steroids. That this will have the same result that did, if not worse, and that. What he's saying from his perspective might be all right in theory, but will crash the markets in reality if he was ever in power.
Well, they're setting we think we know what the left's sort of intention is, if ever there were a Farage government. These have to be worked through. The policy program has to be worked through, and reform has to be careful about, in terms of its spending commitments, and making sure that there are savings, that you can look at savings which correlates to the spending. So there is I accept that the arguments that there is a risk there, but it's very premature at the moment because everything's forming, and the policy program is forming. We'll see what shape that policy program takes, but it is a bit rich for Labour to make the criticisms, given all of the spending that they've made over the past year, even over the past few weeks, with regards to the Chagos agreements, the EU agreements. Again, a lot of what Nigel Farage cites in terms of savings are Labour policies: net zero, international aid, climate change aid, and so forth. So Labour's got to be a bit careful there, because that accusation can be thrown quite easily back at them. And if I was Reform, and if I was the Tories, that's what I would do. That's people who throw stones from glass shouldn't throw stones from glass houses. That's what I would say.
So a couple of points then from me on this. I mean, first of all, and I'm sure you saw it, Chris, and no doubt many of our viewers and listeners will have done as well, is that I thought one of the most interesting moments of the week was Darren Grimes, of course, a leading figure in Reform, and I think now Reform Deputy Leader of Durham County Council, and obviously, a considerable figure in kind of the right-wing media sphere over the past number of years, had what certainly appeared to be a rather uncomfortable few minutes being interviewed by Talk TV's Julia Hartley-Brewer. And to be absolutely fair to her, she absolutely went for him as much as she would anyone from the left. And he seemed, I think, just my take on that really interesting few minutes of interview, was that I thought he seemed fairly uncomfortable having to defend Reform's position on these things, such as the two-child benefit cap, etc. Now, he manfully did defend it, but I didn't think he seemed particularly comfortable doing that, and I thought that was really quite interesting. I wonder how much internal discussion there is within Reform about these policies, and if it's just a captain's call from Nigel Farage. I wonder how much kind of democratic consultation there is within that party. I'm not sure about that. I think that's an open question. So I thought that was really interesting, Chris. And then I think it's interesting to see how the media covers these things, because and we'll come to the Lib Dems week a little bit later on, but just to say now that we've been calling as a party for an ending to the two-child benefit cap for a very long time, and yet didn't get anything like the coverage of Nigel Farage. And it does frustrate me a wee bit that Nigel Farage says something, and it's all over the press, and yet my leader or my party can say, in this case, something similar. Don't say many things similar to Reform, but in this case, we have done. We've both called for the end to this cap, and it basically not cause a ripple. And I do think that the political media sometimes does need to take a bit of a look at itself on how it covers things and the priorities that And I've been I was a radio journalist for a number of years. I've been in radio newsrooms. I've had to make the calls as to what gets covered and what doesn't. And I think sometimes journalists do need to. They're very good at questioning others, political journalists and news editors and all the rest of it. I think sometimes they need to reflect on themselves and what priorities they place on certain stories and certain parties and certain political leaders and personalities. So those are the two things I'd say, Chris, on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say to that, well, Farage is Reform UK are in the lead. They are in all of the polls somewhere in the region of 7 to 11 points ahead of Labour. So of course there's going to be a lot of interest in Reform UK. I think this is going to be a recurring theme. It's you complaining about the media every week, but
and why
but,
the heck
you've
not?
got to do. You've got, well, I mean, Lib Dem's got to think of ways to capture the media's attention, and
well, that's why. I mean, that's why, Chris. And as much as I find it a little bit cringeworthy, and I do, that's why Ed David does these stunts, because we have to. I mean, I do cringe with them, but we have to try and find some way of being covered. And him just standing up and saying stuff doesn't seem to get covered. And so he does these crazy things, which I think makes some Lib Dem members think, oh my goodness, but they do tend to get his coverage. And you're right, it is difficult for us.
So we'll obviously we'll talk about the Lib Dems later, but I wonder if he did, instead of doing all of the silly stuff, and I accept your argument about that, but maybe if he did like some really serious set piece sort of speeches where he presents his team, in the manner in which Nigel Farage has done, and presents himself as serious, then maybe people might start to take notice. But we'll go on just towards the end of the program about that. But in terms of your point about Reform UK and the child's benefit policy, I wonder if during the budget, if Labour actually said they were going to remove the cap, how many of those Reform spokesmen would be criticising it? So, but it is, I mean, there you do have these tensions within conservatism, especially now that conservatism is we're moving from a post-liberal form of conservatism and on to something else. And there will be these conflicts between sort of economic conservatism and more social conservatism. So we'll see how that pans out, but it's very interesting how conservatism, whether it's within Reform UK or whether it's within the Conservative Party, will develop in the next few years.
Yeah, and does this make? I ask you this, Chris, is our resident person on the right. Does this make it more difficult having somewhere down the line before the next election some kind of rapprochement between the Tories and Reform? I mean, does that make that basically impossible? Reform taking on these new, quite left-wing policies.
Yeah, I mean, if they take very firm positions on things, yes, it does. But I think by doing it, by making these policies actually far out in before the election, I think Farage has left himself some wiggle room. He can always say that the economy it sort of tanks even further, and the economy doesn't pick up. He can always say, well, the economy is even worse than what we expected. The policies I announced at the start of the parliaments, they were just, initial positions. And I suspect something like, the 20,000 threshold, he could always knock that down to 15,000. He could always remove the say, well, we can't afford the removing the cap or having the cap at 3 children or whatever. Now, if he does that a lot, then he may lose, obviously, political credibility. But I suspect some of these policies won't turn out to be the final product come 2029.
Well, it's really interesting, Chris. You know that I love Australian politics, and they've had a really interesting week down under. Obviously, Australian Labor recently won a massive majority in their general election, and Anthony Albanese continues as Prime Minister. And not only did he defeat the Conservative coalition of Liberals, as that I hate the fact that their Tories are called Liberals, by the way. I know I always say that, but I really do. But the Liberals and the Nationals that form the Conservative coalition and the opposition, and he defeated the opposition leader Peter Dutton. He lost his seat. But this week we've seen this really interesting thing happen in Aussie politics, and I'll relate this back to the UK in a sec. In the Conservative coalition for a few days, it only was a few days, split apart, and then the Nationals had said that they were going to sit apart from the Liberals, and they were going to go to the crossbench, and the Liberals would just be the official opposition, albeit very, very small, because by themselves they only have like 20 odd seats. Now, in the end, they realised that they couldn't ever win government again without reforming the Conservative coalition, and they sorted out their differences. And by the end of the week, they were back together as the coalition opposing the government. But it just goes to show, doesn't it? And by the way, that's after like 80 odd years of being the Conservative coalition in Australia. But it's interesting to note in terms of the right in the UK that it's all right saying that you need to come together as two parties, and that it's important that you do so. Much more difficult in practice when you've got personalities and you've got policy differences and policy pressures and personality pressures. It takes quite some working on that to keep such a coalition together.
Well, that's why I've always said that some kind of accommodation should happen. But I don't think it will happen, and especially when you have a personality like Farage, who clearly likes being in charge. I can't see him playing second fiddle to anyone, quite frankly. So I would accept that point. I would absolutely. I think this split is a bit stupid, to be honest, but I can't see a circumstance yet, even if things are sort of desperate and Labour somehow recover and somehow the polls are suggesting in 2028 that there will be another Labour government, I still can't see it happening then, because unfortunately we're having a bit of a nervous breakdown in the right, and the egos get in the way and so forth. So yeah, I would agree with that. Shall we move on to Labour?
Let's absolutely move on to Labour. And as I say, it's really quite telling that they're the second party that we talk about this week. So obviously, Chris, in terms of Labour's week, I mean, again, for me, one of the most astonishing kind of scenes of this week played out with Keir Starmer, who, let's remind ourselves, is, actually the Prime Minister, going to a factory up north, and it wasn't to make some great announcement about, saving industry or whatever. It was to have a go at Nigel Farage and reform UK. And, it was, and again, I'm not the first to say this. This has been commented on by people from GB News and others this week, that, it was fairly disastrous for him, in as much as all the questions that were put by the media were saying, well, come on, Reform are clearly doing well, but ultimately at the moment they've got 5 MPs, you've got 400 odd, and here you are making a speech about them as if you're running scared. So I'm not sure it did Starmer any good whatsoever making that speech, and I agree with others. I think it was Alistair Campbell on The Rest Is Politics that I was listening to earlier today, because folks, other political podcasts are available. I mean, not as good as this, obviously, but they are available. There's a lot of agreement on that podcast between him and Rory Stewart, so you don't want to listen to that one. But I think Alistair Campbell was making the point that the government doesn't seem to know which way it's facing at the moment, and that actually the government would do far better, instead of attacking Farage, which it feels like it's got to do. It would be far better that he'd gone to the north and made some kind of statement about what the government was going to do to help those communities. I mean, I'm interested in your take, Chris, as to whether you think that did him and the government one jot of good or not this week.
Well, he looked rattled, didn't he? He visibly looked rattled, and people have been saying all week, all Farage is living rent free in his head, and that's how it came across, and it was extraordinary. I mean, we keep being told that Morgan McSweeney is some kind of genius, and either that's a complete myth, or there really is a rift between Starmer and him. So in that sense, I thought the press conference was a disaster. I think it was very interesting. I thought that was the press conference where the mainstream media, I should say, sort of really turned on Starmer. The questioning was, especially from the BBC, who was extremely vicious. And I was thinking, if only they did that this time last year, instead of giving him like a complete free ride. And see, I'm moaning about the media now. We might be in a very different situation. But I don't know if you agree with me here, Mathew. But all of his attacks on Farage, the personal attacks, the attacks about him being sort of the next Truss, and the markets are going to go into meltdown if you have a reform government. The personal attacks about his sort of background, and he's not really relatable. His digging up previous statements that he made previously, and so forth. It just reminds me of Project Fear all over again, and Project Fear 2, which was how the centre left parties treated Boris as well in 2019. And it just seems to me that Labour, Remainers, sort of centre left parties, they never learn. They always resort to the same sort of tactics. And I don't know, maybe this time it might work. Maybe the prospect of Truss. I don't know what the public now sort of think of that, and whether that's going to be an effective a tactic, and it will work on the public or not.
Truss is still pretty toxic, though, isn't she? I mean, I gather that she, her name does come up on the doorstep. I mean, those 40 odd days of her premiership were, about as low as you can go, and did affect real people's mortgages and all the rest of it. And so, I think that time is still politics. And if they can tie I mean, you may think it's unfair, Chris, but I think if the government and others can tie Farage's name to trust, I think that may have an effect. Well, time will tell. But I mean, I agree with you in as much as I think it's fairly demeaning for the Prime Minister to be placing so much focus on the leader of a party which, yes, are doing well in the polls and are clearly a threat to Labour, but which I think can be stopped if the government starts delivering. But it's the worst of both worlds for Starmer and Rachel Reeves and the government, in as much as nothing seems to be landing home. Well, whatever they try, nothing seems to be landing home for them. And in actual fact, what Starmer does by doing a whole speech, calling the press up north and doing a whole speech and a whole press conference on Nigel Farage, is actually he makes Nigel Farage an even bigger political figure and as someone that is a clear threat to the government. So it does the reverse of what he wants it to do. Now, there's another way to look at this as well, in as much as that it also diminishes the Tories yet further, and that may be part of Starmer's thinking here, that if he can talk up reform, who under the first past the post system, no matter how popular they are, would still struggle to get the number of seats that they need to win outright at the next election. Maybe he thinks that by bigging reform up and Farage, that people will even more forget about the actual official opposition, which, by the way, folks, is still Kemi Badenoch and the Conservatives. So I think we'll come on to the Tories week momentarily, but I think that could well be part of the Labour thinking here. But I'm still not sure. I just felt that. I think the Prime Minister, just to say, Chris, I think, Keir, and I don't know Morgan McSweeney or his press advisors or whoever, but Starmer had been placed in a position where he didn't look very comfortable, I thought, at all.
Yeah, and really this whole business of trying to portray himself as sort of working class vicariously through his father as well. It's no one's buying that as well.
He was a toolmaker,
Yeah.
And I mean, in actual fact, I think I'm right in saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right in saying that nothing wrong with this at all, by the way, is perfectly good thing. But I think I'm right in saying that actually his dad owned the tool factory, which is not to say that he wasn't the tool maker, but I think by saying it that way, it doesn't quite reflect the plurality of what his dad actually was. But I think it also, the fact is that, number one, working class people don't all have the same view on anything. I'm working class and clearly have a different view to other people. So, I mean, the working class aren't just one homogenous group that all think the same way. That's the first point. But even for those working class that do like Farage, but then it's not about the background of the person. I mean, who would have thought in that case that the working class would have liked Boris Johnson? But they absolutely did. And so, I think what people are looking for, and I mean, we're not going to get into now, I don't think, whether Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage are really authentic, but they come across as authentic. People think of them as authentic personalities. And I think that is what people like, and what they don't necessarily like is what they've had to get used to from both Labour and the Conservatives in recent years, certainly in terms of Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, is this managerial kind of robots, and with apparently no personality at all. And so, yeah, I mean, again, Chris, I agree with you. I don't think it did Starmer any good whatsoever in that sense.
Yeah, and we really should stop agreeing so much. But the one other thing I'd say before we move on to the Tories is that it's amazing how this government, and we're only coming up to the first anniversary. It's amazing how this government is behaving as if it's like it's been in power for like 14 years and it has absolutely no idea or no clue what it's doing, and it's absolutely bereft of ideas, and it just looks exhausted already. It's extraordinary how quickly that process has happened very quickly.
I agree, but just to say, there is one idea, Chris, which is on the front of the Times today, that apparently Rachel Reeves is going to announce significant investment in the Red Wall. So again, this is quite. I don't know where the money for that is, but I mean, you know, having to go
This
Nigel
is
Farage
the party that's criticising Farage for being reckless with.
Well,
it's
indeed,
not. I wouldn't say spending on the Red Wall is reckless, but
no.
spending money and just keep endlessly making spending announcements, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely, and so you know, I think they may well find their own criticism of Farage being turned around on them, but clearly they do need to win those Red Wall seats back. They need to keep them. They've won a number of them back at the last election, but clearly they need to try and keep them if they stand any chance of keeping such a majority or a majority at all come 2029, when we think the next election will be. But it'll be interesting to see what those spending commitments are, where they're going to claim that the money is going to come from. But I mean, this might be one of the trouble is the government can't win in a situation like this, because if they don't spend money on those areas, they get attacked for not spending money on those areas. If they do spend money on them, then they get accused of pork barrelling and only spending money in Labour constituencies. So in that sense, I feel for the government, because they can't really win either way. But you know, I just wanted to say, Chris, you say they have no ideas. Well, that is a no idea this week, so we'll see what happens.
Well, it's hardly an original one, is it? Really?
I didn't say it was original.
Is it?
I don't claim it to be original at all, but it's just an idea that they have come up with. Before we forget about them, and it's very easy to do so, shall we go on to the Conservatives week, Chris? So yeah, I mean, you know, well, I mean, we've seen one interesting thing this week, and surprisingly enough, this will be a real shocker for you folks. It's not come from Kemi Badenoch, who was actually the leader of the opposition and the Conservative leader. It's come from someone who, of course, isn't running any kind of leadership campaign at all, doesn't seek the top job in his party one little bit. That's not the reason why he's doing what he's doing. I jest, of course, about Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, who I'm sure almost all of the people watching or listening to this podcast will know by now, did a rather interesting video this week that has had, I think, 7 or 8 maybe more million views, and that was of him challenging people who were trying to use the tube who were getting away with using the tube without paying, which clearly is wrong. And you know, I know you, Chris, who lives in London, have seen that happen multiple times. I've seen it happen when I've been down visiting London, and yeah, of course, people shouldn't be doing that. It's absolutely wrong. It's frustrating for those of us that do abide by the law and pay our way when using the tube. And it certainly created waves. I personally thought that it was a bit kind of performative from him, considering that, and I know Sadiq Khan is in effect the Police and Crime Commissioner for London, but you know, that doesn't mean that, you know, there's no responsibility from Westminster, and the Tories were in charge for 14 years, so you know that needs saying. But it certainly created ripples this week, that video.
Yeah, it's certainly created a lot of buzz online. I was asked to speak about it, and I don't often speak about things outside my area of expertise on LBC. And if you just look at the politics behind it, so what I said on LBC was that, well, firstly, he's channeling his Roger Cook for those of you.
Oh, I remember Roger Cook.
Yeah, showing our age here, but he was like this big investigative journalist who sort of confronted crooks and criminals.
I used to love his show, Chris. I used to absolutely adore his show.
Yeah.
And I think it was made actually up here in in the Midlands, ITV Central, and I used to absolutely. The Cook Report was brilliant. Loved it.
Yeah, so Jenrick, I think he did something else on that as well, about shoplifting or something. But it's actually a very innovative piece of sort of political communication, I think. And we're now used to seeing MPs going on social media, make videos and so forth. But Jenrick's taken it to another level and actually actively doing something, in this case sort of stopping sort of criminals and stopping people, or stopping people sort of jumping the gate and so forth. So I think it's very interesting, but of course it's Jenrick that's kind of made all the waves for the Conservatives this week, and people were entitled to ask, where was Kemi Badenoch? Now she's entitled to a holiday. This is the week. This is the only week where the people are entitled. MPs can.
But he'd have known that. Sorry to interrupt you, Chris, but just to make the point that Jenrick would have known that as well, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that he, I mean, again, I don't want to be conspiratorial where there isn't one necessarily, but part of me does think that, he's released that in the week that he knows very little would be coming out from his leader.
But it does raise the question of whether, well, why didn't Badenoch's team think of that? She could have easily have done something prior to Parliament breaking up and release something. And the thing is, I mean, I don't know how aware she is. She must know it's very existential for her in terms of her leadership, and yet other people are sort of showing energy and doing things, and there doesn't seem to be still much activity from her. So.
Well, and also, Chris, we have seen renewed speculation again over the past couple of days that her she's not long for this world, so to speak, politically, in terms of leading the Conservative Party. I mean, part of me thinks that she's been pretty useless thus far, but also part of me thinks that I'm not really sure it'd do the Conservatives much good to be changing leader yet again. I mean, you can't keep doing that, surely, can you, and retain any kind of credibility?
No, and I think you're right there. And it is a very difficult one, which is why I've always said, if people do move against Badenoch, I mean, firstly, the rules. I think she's, the block in which people can move against Badenoch lifts in November. So, but we know the 1922 committee changes its rules. That's another thing that makes the parliamentary party look ridiculous, is that it changes its rules whenever it wants. So again, but so there's that. But also it does. The reason why I think there's hesitancy at the moment is because it does look ridiculous. But at the same time, can the Tories still have a situation where they're on 16-17% in the polls? Can I just ask you one question very briefly, just going back to what Jenrick did? What did you think about that, and kind of the messaging that he was bringing? There was a lot of reaction, especially on the left, that didn't focus on the actual issue he was talking about, which was fare dodging, but we're talking about he questioning whether he himself broke TfL rules, or some of the things he was saying, about weird Turkish barbers and so forth. I mean, is this really a good look for the centre left to not actually talk about the issue that is making people irate, and talk about kind of these other issues which I don't think people care as much about?
Well, I mean, I did have someone say to me when I criticised that, when I said it was performative nonsense, that say to me, look, if Ed Davey had done that, you'd have praised it to high heaven. And in truth, I probably would have. So, I think that just, hey, I can be politically biased as much as anyone.
But this is useful as well. This is actually useful. He's not just messing about in a theme park.
Oh, Chris, what can I say to you? But yeah, I mean, I think, there's not much to say about the issue other than that he's right. I mean, people shouldn't be fare dodging, and it's completely wrong. And I'm only down in London, probably about once a month, and I certainly see it on those rare occasions when I do visit the capital, and it's blooming frustrating when the rest of us are, quite rightly abiding by the law and paying what needs to be paid in not inexpensive London, and you know that better than I do, Chris. But part of me did. It was clearly an attack on Labour more broadly and Sadiq Khan in particular. But as I say, the fact is that Sadiq Khan absolutely bears some responsibility as the person in charge of policing in London. But the person ultimately in charge of policing is, of course, the Home Secretary. And for the past 14 years up until this last year, the Tories were in charge of that. So, I think, again, there's a little bit of hypocrisy there, but not that it's not unknown for politicians to say and do things that are a wee bit hypocritical. But I also think as well that there's no doubt that this is Robert Jenrick saying, hey, look, I can communicate with voters, I can get airtime on the traditional media and breakthrough on social media as well. So guys and girls, if you're looking for a new leader very shortly, I'm your man. And so I think definitely that was part of what he was doing, a number of things all at the same time with that video. And I think it was definitely one of the political moments of the week, and much commented on. I'm sure it will continue to be throughout the weekend and into the Sunday papers as well. And for Badenoch, at this point, Chris, I don't know what she does to try and rescue her, but I think now, and this is a hostage to fortune, but I think her political position is untenable now, and that she's nothing she can do.
Yeah, unless she's all of a sudden cultivates this big burst of energy, she makes a flurry of positions or announcements, and she has a good, I'm not a good conference speech, but a fantastic conference speech, a David Cameron level conference speech. I think that's the only things that can save her now. But that's but I think the odds are against her at the moment. So definitely, but we'll see.
Now, shall we go on to the Lib Dems? And this will be very short because they've not been especially prominent, and my part hasn't been especially prominent this week. To be serious for a moment, one of the people that has been front and centre this week, and quite rightly, has been the party's leader in Liverpool, Councillor Carl Cashman, my friend Carl, who has been doing the rounds, obviously talking about the dreadful occurrence that we talked about at the start of this podcast, and also quite rightly talking about the fact that the people of Liverpool have, as they always do during times of crisis and tragedy, really do rally round. It's sometimes a cliche to talk about the community coming together, but I think we can fairly say that about Liverpool and the wonderful people there. And so it's been great to see Carl front and centre, and he did Talk TV this week and other things, and it was good to see the national party media and social media, putting out clips of what he's had to say. So he's been really the most prominent Lib Dem this week. Although I should just point out that my leader, Davey, him of the silly stunts, has his new book out. I know, Chris, that you're going to go out and buy a copy straight away after this podcast.
The thing is, why didn't he do a big book launch or something?
Well, that may be to come. I don't know, Chris. But his book is now out. It's all about care, which I know that you think that it's it goes on about too much, but he's clearly decided.
Well, no, it's not that it's not important, but he does. No. He obviously needs to widen his range of things that he talks about eventually.
Yeah, and I agree. And I was thinking this week actually that I haven't heard him talk about one of the issues that was a Lib Dem mainstay for many, many years and should be again, which is, education. We were the party of education in the eyes of many people, and, have long since had many teachers vote for us fairly consistently. And yet I can't remember the last time Ed Davey raised education at Prime Minister's questions. And I agree with you, Chris, what we were saying earlier on. I do agree that what I think we need to see from Ed is now some set piece speeches where he really does go into, I know we're years out from a general election, so you don't want to be too policy heavy, but I think you can still have, like for us this week, you can still make set piece speeches which you invite the media to and then take questions. And I do think that he needs to do that. I mean, I like what he's been saying in terms of, I think it's smart political positioning from Ed Davey to be anti-Trump and to be anti-Farage and say that we're the antithesis of that kind of politics. But I think and has been doing a fair bit on the NHS, which I think is important as well. But I agree with you, I would like to see some set piece speeches from Ed Davey and Daisy Cooper and some of our other prominent Lib Dems. I think it's something that has been notably missing. Can I say, Chris, that as you have promoted your wonderful appearance on LBC this week, I'm also going to again mention my latest column for Lib Dem Voice, which I know people are going out there straight away after this podcast airs to Google to find my column. But in that, I said that there is an opportunity. I'm not saying how likely it's going to happen, but how likely it is. But there is an opportunity at the next election, especially if the Tories continue their slide into oblivion, for the Lib Dems to overtake them in terms of a number of seats. I don't say it would be easy, but don't forget the gulf isn't that wide. I mean, we have 72 and they have 120, 121. I mean, it's not unthinkable that we could do that. And there was a poll this week where, again, we were absolutely neck and neck in the polls, the Lib Dems and the Conservatives. But I do think for us to do that, we do need to try and find a way, and it's difficult in this media environment, but we do need to try and find a way to cut through. And it can't just be by doing some silly things at various theme parks. So I hope that prominent Lib Dems are watching or listening to this podcast and will take my advice, Chris.
Yeah, and I mean, for the party's sake, they should listen to that, and it must be very frustrating among some Lib Dems, to look at reform and to look at the breakthrough, and you're the party that kind of always wanted that kind of breakthrough, but you weren't the ones to achieve it, but. We'll see how things go.
We will. Now, I do just want to, I don't think we have a little graphic for them, but I do want to just mention the Greens, because we shouldn't forget that they have a leadership contest going on. And, there we are. And I don't want to say that, that it's nasty per se, but it certainly has its rough edges. And it's interesting to see a party that, always portrays itself as kind of the nice party to be having a less than totally wonderfully nice leadership contest. And if you don't know, folks, and I mean, why would you? It's my mate Zach Polansky, who I used to know when he was a Lib Dem. Doesn't like us to mention that, but he was a Lib Dem for a while. Up against who is the deputy leader of the party at the moment and a member of the London Assembly Green Group, up against Adrian Ramsey and Ellie Chowns, I think it is. I don't quite know how to pronounce it. Who are two of the Green MPs at the moment, and all the Green establishment, including the Green members of the Lords, at least one of them, and Caroline Lucas, the very well known former Green MP and party leader, are all backing the MPs who are running for it. But it does seem to me, from what I see, at least on social media, that the activist base is really getting behind Zach Polansky. And it does seem to me that this really is a crossroads moment for the Greens. Are they going to go steady as she goes, and we're going to back these two MPs from kind of the green leafy shires, or are they going to go for, in effect, the Farage of the left, Zach Polansky, who I do think, if he does win it, is going to be really interesting, because if he can do the kind of the left-wing version of Farage, that real populist We are unashamedly left wing. I think there is room actually in our party politics, for that. I think that could be, and he's a very good communicator, Zach Polanski. That could be potentially as interesting a political development as the rise of Farage, Chris.
Yeah, and if you look at the polling, I mean, and in some respects is unsurprising, but the young are very much sort of radically to the left, and they actually, in polls like that, the Greens do get quite a bit of support. So there's a potential opportunity there, but I think it'll be interesting to see who gets that vote. Is it the Greens? Is it the Lib Dems? Or is it the independent, Jeremy Corbyn's group?
And also, I mean, we may have to add, come next year, we may have to add a new graphic to our screen, because it does sound as if, from what Jeremy Corbyn has had to say, that they are going to actually launch a new party. Now, ordinarily, when I hear about new left-wing parties being launched, I think, yet another. But Corbyn is undoubtedly a big figure, and lots of people rally to his cause. And so it will be interesting to see if he does indeed do that, quite how popular that party is.
Yep. Of course, there is the danger that the left vote is going to completely splinter. So people on the left and the radical left, do need to reflect on whether this is a good thing, given we've seen how damaging the splintering on the right has done to it.
But just to say that the right could splinter further yet more as well, couldn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Because we've got Ben Habib, the former Brexit Party MEP, saying that he's going to, I believe, launch his own party, and there comes a point, I think, where all of this becomes a wee bit ridiculous. But I do think
people's front stuff.
Yeah, indeed, absolutely. But I also think, Chris, that I think the really interesting thing, and I know we must end because we've gone over the hour now, but I think the really interesting thing is that even under first past the post, we are becoming a kind of, dare I say it, Chris, a kind of European style multi-party democracy, and that is happening under first past the post. We in my view, we still need proportional representation, but it's kind of happening regardless. That you have these bigger blocks, and then you have some middle-sized block like the Lib Dems, and then you have some smaller blocks, but they all have a part to play and reach out to different parts of the electorate.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see whether this lasts, because that has threatened to happen before, especially in 2015, where Farage with UKIP achieved a lot of votes, and it has happened, for example, during the 1930s, where you had kind of the national parties working together in government, as well as, so you had National Labour and Labour and so forth. We could be in another period of that. Or we could be, this could be more permanent, and we could have a more continental style of politics.
Absolutely. And as we always say, it makes it a really interesting time for political podcasts. And so, folks, thanks for being with us this week. So much to fit in that we have just ever so slightly gone over the hour mark, but I'm sure you'll forgive us that. And whether you're watching us or listening to us on your Monday morning commute or whatever you're doing, thanks for doing so. Please do all the internet-y things, subscribe, like, tell your friends. We are slowly building our audience, and we're really pleased about that, but we'd like it to go a little bit faster. So please do tell folks that, hey, there's this wonderful new podcast where these two guys hammer it out and then remain friends at the end. So another busy week, Chris.
Yeah, I believe that the defence review is due next week, so that'll be interesting for me at the very least.
It will.
So yes, I'll be busy. Put it that way.
Chris will no doubt be appearing everywhere. Just turn into GB News. He'll be appearing, no doubt. And we should also say that very, very soon, maybe even next week, and here's a little teaser for you, we're going to start having some guests. So we're really excited about it. We've got some big names lined up. So follow us on social media at Frenemies for some little hints over the next few days, and then do join us again next week.
Yeah, but yeah, do join us again, and it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me. See you next week on Political Frenemies.